But let's move on to another story that's been sort of rankling for a while now. There has been another provocation by Khalistani elements in Canada. Just days before the anniversary of Operation Blue Star, which was earlier this week, a parade was taken out by Khalistani sympathizers in the city of Brampton in Ontario in Canada. A tableau depicting Indira Gandhi's assassination was part of this parade. The video went viral on social media. It evoked a sharp reaction from the Congress, which called for universal condemnation. External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar slammed the Canadian government for giving space to these extremists, something that India has been raising with Canada for a while. And earlier in the day, the Canadian High Commissioner to India tweeted that he was appalled by the incident and condemned the act. However, the question remains, is that enough? Is a mere tweet and a condemnation enough? Time and again, we have seen Hindu temples, the Indian consulate there being vandalized, and statues, including the statue of Mahatma Gandhi, being defaced by pro-Khalistani elements in Canada. Why does the Justin Trudeau government embolden such acts without strictest of punishment and the swiftest of punishment? Can the Indian government mount the necessary pressure that will force the Canadian government to act?
This float issue used. Let me actually answer it, because I think there's a bigger issue involved, and the bigger issue involved is really the space that Canada has continuously and frankly to us, we are at a loss to understand, other than the requirements of vote bank politics, why anybody would do this.
ऐसी चीज जो हत्या है वो अपराधी घटना होती है, और अपराधी घटना को और उस अपराध की घटना को सेलिब्रेट नहीं किया जाना चाहिए, और उसी समाज और सरकार को ऐसी चीजों पे कार्रवाई करनी चाहिए, क्योंकि वो उनके नियम और उनके कानून में भी जो है भली चीज नहीं मानी जाती।
And we're getting breaking news. The Congress party is now hit out of the centre. K.C. Venugopal has tweeted, and I quote, Indira Gandhi was one of the tallest leaders of Indian history who laid down her life to protect India's sovereignty. The disgusting events in Brampton, Canada compelled Prime Minister Modi to rise above partisan interests and speak against such events being allowed. Why has Dr. S. Jaishankar not summoned the Canadian High Commissioner yet? Pallavi has more details on this. So the Congress really rallying around this story?
Yes, and they've upped their ante, because in the afternoon we saw tweets from Milind Devra, Jairam Ramesh, Zaka, where essentially they wanted the central government to step in. And we saw the Foreign Affairs Minister actually stepping in and also condemning it. But what now they want to do is also make it a little bit more political. K.C. Venugopal's comment is interesting, because now he wants the Prime Minister to step in, and he wants a statement from the Prime Minister. So clearly the words of the Foreign Minister earlier today at the press conference is no longer enough. The Congress certainly want to whip up this entire issue, especially because it concerns the former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and also then take pot shots at the central government, particularly over its foreign policy.
All right, Pallavi, we'll leave it at that. Let me now open this up to our guests. R.P. Singh, spokesperson of the BJP, Rohan Gupta, national spokesperson of the Congress, Rajiv Dogra, former diplomat, and Terry Miliuski is the author of Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Project. R.P. Singh, the Congress is saying that, Indira Gandhi was a Prime Minister of the nation. She laid down her life for India's sovereignty. Why isn't stricter action being taken? At the very least, the Canadian High Commissioner should be summoned and the government of India's displeasure be known.
Well, Jaishankar ji, through his statement, has already shown his displeasure and has mentioned in detail how we are taking this complete tableau, or whatever it's called, not in good terms, and then it's not appreciated at all. And even I am saying on record that, and my tweet was at around 9:30 in the morning after watching this on your channel itself, that this is not acceptable. And she was a Prime Minister of the country. Whatever differences we might have with her and as a party man or even as a Sikh, but we will not allow any sort of violence being projected and Mrs. Gandhi being shown in this way on a float abroad. And also that no Sikhism. I mean, let me put this also on record because I'm the Sikh panelist on your panel now. That no way Sikhism teaches you violence. Sikh gurus never taught us any violence. The first guru to 10th guru never taught us to do anything of this sort. I mean, and it's not in Guru, even in Guru Granth Sahib. We only speak of humanism. And this is shocking. This is appalling. I mean, this has to be condemned in whatever term it has to be. I mean, this is not acceptable. And then this handful of fringe who thinks that they can overshadow the Sikhs overall in diaspora and even here in India, they're mistaken. They think by doing so they can probably gain some...
External Affairs Minister has spoken about it in no uncertain terms. He has said this is absolutely condemnable. He's also said that this is not an incident in isolation. There have been previous instances as well. And he says it baffles us. The only reason somebody should allow this to happen is for vote bank politics. What more are you expecting him to do?
If you see that Mr. Jaishankar has issued the statement, I think this act is not a normal act. The former Prime Minister of the country, who has given her life against terrorism for the country, and the way this incident has happened after 4 days, thus giving a statement is not enough. He should have summoned the Canadian High Commissioner long back. It's after demand of Congress Party, I think the statement has come. It's not about one Prime Minister, it's about the country. The way Canada has allowed Khalistan movement, it has given the space for last many years. We see that the attacks on temples or protest against Indian High Commission. I think this issue needs to be taken very seriously by government of India. And the way this has crossed now, this has crossed the limit. Like the way they have shown Indira Gandhi in their float is not acceptable at all. So just writing a statement or just putting a statement is not enough. It should have been taken very, very seriously. This is against the question. This is the question of pride of the country.
So Rajiv Dogra, there is a pattern here. Attacks on the High Commissioner or consulates, attacks on Mahatma Gandhi's statue. There was even, I'm given to understand, the so-called Khalistan referendum in Canada. So clearly, if the Canadians are not taking India's sovereignty and how important that is to us seriously, then India should reciprocate in the same coin.
Well, exactly. But before I answer your question, I'll go up regarding your leading statement that there seems to be a pattern. Indeed, there is a pattern. And I know it for a fact that ISI is guiding that pattern. Second, why is Canada the epicenter of all these misactions or atrocious actions? The referendum was planned at least 6 to 7 years in advance. It was supposed to be held in 2020, and it was started in Canada in 2022 only because of COVID. Otherwise, it would have happened a couple of years earlier, and the crescendo of the movement may have reached by now. So we are fortunate that way that nature intervened against them, because what they are doing is scornful. The second thing is that why is the government of Canada not condemning this or controlling this, when we see that Australian government, the British government had condemned the incidents which took place in their respective countries, and to some extent it has been controlled. Canada, it seems, is, especially Prime Minister Trudeau's party, it seems is swayed by the fact that there are 24 MPs who claim to have some kind of a connection with these Khalistani people. So what should India do, A, against the people who are the perpetrators of this horrible incident, and B, against the Canadian government itself, so that it takes some kind of action against these people who are disturbing the peace of their own country, who are indulging in acts which are just short of terrorism.
That is exactly what India's problem is, Terry Miliuski, that, Australia also saw similar scenes. There were attacks on public places, there were Khalistani slogans, temples were attacked, but the Australian government has taken visible action against these elements. People have been arrested, cases are going on, whereas in Canada it seems like there seems to be, I'm sorry I'm using these strong words, but it's almost like a free run for these elements. Tomorrow, if India were to host, let's say, a referendum on Quebec, will that go down well in Canada?
That's a painful point you've made for a Canadian, and it's a good one. The short answer to the question, you know, how can this happen? Why does Canada allow it? Indian politicians have known for many years why Canada allows it. It's a simple matter that Canada has freedom of speech. This is the standard official answer from Canadian governments. Look, we don't like this, but we support the territorial integrity of India and the unity of India, but we have freedom of speech and we're not going to abolish that. Well, here's the problem. The reason why the Khalistanis get away with this, and this has been going on for decades now, this sort of glorification of terrorist violence. There's worse incidents than this in the past. Just mention the glorification of the Air India bomber, Talvinder Parmar, whose poster is life-size on the outside of an important Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia, the worst mass murderer in Canadian history, the author of the Flight 182 bombing in 1985, which killed a total of 331 completely innocent civilians. So it's been going on for decades, and the reason that it's been going on is because, yes, the Khalistanis have freedom of speech, and we're not going to abolish that, but so do Canadian politicians, and they don't use it. They have freedom of speech to denounce this firmly, publicly, immediately, but they don't use that because they're afraid. Because they are, forgive me, I'm a Canadian, they're cowards. They're afraid that they will lose votes. Because this isn't just the Trudeau government. They happen to be in power now, thanks to the support of the leftist New Democratic Party, headed by Jagmeet Singh, who's a known sympathizer of the Khalistan movement, who, when I asked him in an interview to condemn the posters of Parmar, the Air India bomber, refused on 5 occasions to condemn and denounce.
No, but Mr. Miliuski, you know, I don't buy this whole freedom of expression argument. What is the freedom of expression in showing, you know, a blood-stained puppet figure of the former Indian Prime Minister, puppet figures of two of her bodyguards shooting her? What is freedom of expression here? I mean, there's no freedom of expression here.
There is a difference between violence and freedom of speech. We don't lock people up in Canada for speech which we deplore. And that isn't going to change in any of the Western democracies. That you can ask this of the Australians or the Germans or the British. No, they do not criminalize speech, and that's not going to happen.
I'm sorry. What this is, and let's be very clear about it. I don't think this is freedom of speech. This is eulogizing an assassination of a sitting, at that time, a sitting head of government.
And we both...
You are valorizing an assassination of a former prime minister. I'm sorry, there's no freedom of expression here.
But don't mistake me.
No,
I'm not saying that this is fine. Nobody is saying it. I have not come to say that it's fine because of freedom of speech. I'm saying that Indian politicians need to understand that they need to be more serious about persuading Canada to denounce and condemn this by using force, by using the diplomatic force of saying, if India is a rising power, you want free trade with India, you want access to the Indian market, forget it. We will not deal with any politician who will not publicly and explicitly and clearly condemn this kind of glorification
I'm sorry.
of violence.
I don't think this public condemnation is good enough. What needs to be done is the organizers of this tableau need to be arrested, because you are effectively, like I said, eulogizing an assassination of a former Prime Minister of India. I mean, that's unacceptable. I firmly believe that has nothing to do with freedom of expression. I'm sorry. This is not freedom of expression. RP Singh.
It is disgraceful.
RP Singh.
It is disgraceful.
No, it's disgraceful, it's condemnable, and it's criminal. I'm very clear about it.
Not
RP Singh.
Well, you're wrong. Under Canadian law, that's not the case.
Mr. Terry, can you run a similar tableau of the Kanishka aeroplane being bombed like this and people's body parts spewing outside the plane, and similar thing can be run on the streets of Brampton or any other part of the Canada? You can't dare.
If Canadian politicians will tolerate this disgraceful display, yes, they will probably tolerate that. They do tolerate the display of martyr posters with ceremonial sword and glamorous pictures of Talvinder Parmar. They'll tolerate anything. They should not. It's an absolute disgrace to Canada, but they do tolerate it. And they have legal grounds to say that it's freedom of speech under Canadian law, maybe not under Indian law, fine. But my point is this, that Indian
Mr. Miliuski, one second. Tomorrow. No, one second. Let me ask a question. Tomorrow, if there was a giant poster of Osama bin Laden, right, outside the White House or outside the U.S. Congress or the Canadian government building, and people there were coming and eulogizing him, is that acceptable? Is that freedom of expression?
It is freedom of expression, but it's not acceptable to me.
That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. But the depiction of the assassination of a former Indian Prime Minister is freedom of expression. Wow.
I'm not saying I did not say it's acceptable.
I'm sorry, that's convenient to put it mildly, and that's double standards to call it out.
I'm not. No. Wrong. I'm saying both are unacceptable. You mistake me.
No.
I'm saying both are unacceptable. Both are disgraceful.
Well, this is rank hypocrisy of the Canadian system.
I challenge you tonight. And when I say you, it's not just you, Mr. Miliuski. I challenge anybody watching this that tomorrow, if a giant poster of Osama bin Laden came up anywhere in any Western capital, and people were standing there and singing praises of this terrorist, they will be rounded up and put in jail, is what they will be done with.
Well,
they will not be brooked under, oh, this is freedom of expression. I'm sorry.
I'm afraid that the law says you're wrong, and that's a problem. So how do we solve it is the issue.
No.
We both agree that this is a disgraceful
No, I'm very clear about it.
And that's
Western societies, Western democracies, it can't be, oh, the terrorists that we think are terrorists, but your terrorists are not terrorists. I'm sorry. I don't think, that's not acceptable. Rohan.
Nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying that. That's a straw man. That's a straw man. You're mistaking my point.
1 second. Rohan Gupta, yeah.
This cannot be freedom of speech. What is he talking? We are talking about former Prime Minister of the country, and he is saying that under the law of Canadian government, this is not, this is freedom of speech. How can you say that? How can you have double standards when you ask question about the terrorist?
I'm correctly characterizing Canadian law, sir. I'm correctly characterizing the state of the law. And the problem is it's not enough for Canadian politicians, it's not enough for Indian politicians to bang the table and say, lock him up. What do we charge them with? What do we charge them with?
Insulting India. It's not about India putting pressure. You need to understand that you are insulting the former Prime Minister of a particular country who has good ties with Canada. You cannot justify I'm sorry to say there is no discussion on this. I'm really sorry to say there cannot be any discussion on this. It is against Canadian Prime Minister.
You forget that you've forgotten, sir, that I'm on your side of the issue. I'm on your side of the issue, saying this is unacceptable. I got
to leave it at that. You know, I'm very clear tonight, ladies and gentlemen. If Osama bin Laden is a terrorist, so are the assassins of Indira Gandhi. Absolutely crystal clear about it. No ifs and buts. It can't be that one set of terrorists are okay, the other set of terrorists are not. I don't think that's acceptable. If Western societies don't come around to understanding this, that it is not okay, it is criminal to be showing the assassination of a former Prime Minister, blood and all, in a public tableau or a float, I don't know what can get them to see reason. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time. Good night.
And